Welcome to the RE Human Layer Security podcast, the show that flips the script on cybersecurity. I'm Tim Sadler, the CEO and co-founder of Tessian, and in each episode, I'll be interviewing IT and business leaders about why we need to protect people, not just machines and data, to stop breaches and empower businesses to achieve their missions. Hi, everyone. I hope you're continuing to enjoy our second season of the RE Human Layer Security podcast. If you are, please do leave us a review or get in touch. We'd love to hear your feedback. This week, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Eric Cole, a former CIA hacker, cybersecurity commissioned to the Obama administration, and advisor to clients including the Obama family, Bill and Melinda Gates, and a number of Fortune 500 companies. Dr. Cole has over 30 years of experience in cybersecurity and is renowned for sharing tips on how we can protect our personal and professional data. He also has a new book titled Cyber Crisis, Protecting Your Business from Real Threats in the Virtual World, which I'm looking forward to hearing more about during our discussion. Eric, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Eric, it's quite a CV from your time at the CIA to the White House to Fortune 500 companies. Is there any particular highlight or key learning from this experience that you want to share with our audience today?
I would just share, it's one of the pieces of advice my dad told me when I was younger, which is if you find something you love to do, you never have to work a day in your life. So I always have people going, man, how many hours a day do you work? And I'm like, 0. And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm like, I spend 15 hours a day having fun, right? I truly believe everyone is put on this planet for a purpose. And my purpose is to end suffering in cyberspace and make cyberspace a safe place to live, work, and raise a family. So to me, it's all just been a wonderful ride. And I've just been blessed with the experiences I've had available to me.
Could you tell us a bit about, your personal story and journey to cybersecurity?
Sure. So I was in college majoring in computer science. And back then, this was in the 80s. Yeah, I'm what they call an old OG. I like to say original gangster. My daughter tells me it stands for old guy. But this was back in the 80s where computer science was really electrical engineering with a couple of programming classes. So I'm taking Fortran and circuit design, and I'm sitting there going, is this what I really want to do? So I go down to the co-op office, and like I said, things just line up when you're following your passion. And the next day, the CIA was interviewing on campus. So I go in, I interview with the CIA and go through that whole process, flying to Washington, polygraphs, all that fun stuff. And then they're going in and saying, okay, where do you want to work? And there's a programming, there's a networking, and there's this little group called cybersecurity. And it's funny because everyone told me to go for networking. They're like, Eric, cybersecurity is a fad. We're going to figure it out. There's not going to be a lot of career growth in cybersecurity, but I don't always, I take advice, but I don't always listen. So I went and worked in the area of cybersecurity. And then I asked a simple question when we were deploying systems, how do we know if they're secure? And that took me on a journey of 8 years of being a professional hacker for the CIA, where I basically got to break into anything with a computer and a couple things that didn't have computers, and really understood and got in the mindset of the offense, the adversary, which to me is a key component, because the way you win and successful at cybersecurity is you always have to let the offense guide the defense. You need to understand the threats first so you can fix and protect against the vulnerabilities.
So 10 years ago, when I started in this industry, things were completely different. There are a lot of companies that we would go and meet with and speak to that didn't even have a security team. So how have things changed, in the past 30 years for you and your experience? So what did cybersecurity start out as an industry those years ago, and how have things changed since?
To me, so 30 years ago, not only did people not understand cybersecurity, but they didn't know what it was. I joke 30 years ago, if I went to a party or I went to a family gathering and they said, Eric, what do you do? And I said, oh, I do cybersecurity. Like they'd grab their children and they'd be like, don't talk to that guy. He's weird, right? And you were that weird, strange person. Today, I'm the coolest kid on the block, right? Now when you go and you say, oh, I'm a cybersecurity person, I used to be a hacker, they think it's the coolest thing on the planet. So to me, the general concept of cybersecurity and that it's generally important, I think has changed. People now know the term. It's a household name. They understand that cybersecurity is real, but I still don't think that organizations truly understand what it means and how to implement effective security. And to me, the biggest problem today is there's no communication between the technical folks and the executives. Most executives say, if we spend money and we hire people, we'll be secure. And I think we've all seen that's not the case. And then you have these world-class technical people that are out there saying, we need this, but they're not communicating in business terms to the executives. So the executives aren't listening and doing what they're supposed to. And that's what we have today, where you have companies spending a lot of money and a lot of resources on cyber, but not fixing the basic core areas. So to me, the big focus that I've been pushing a lot in the last 12 months is really that chief information security officer. A lot of organizations think it's a technical position, and that's the biggest mistake. You can be a world-class technical person. That's not a CISO. A CISO is a strategic thinker that can communicate technical components to business language so the executives can make the correct decision. And to me, that's the broken piece in many organizations.
Tell us a bit more about that. So, if you're an organization and you're dealing, you've already got a security team in place, and maybe you're suffering from this kind of gap between the technologists and the executives of the organization, how do you go about addressing that?
To me, it's twofold. One is you need to assess, if you don't have a chief information security officer, you need one. But if you do have a chief information security officer, you need to assess, are they in the right position? Because in most companies, the way people become CISO or get the CISO title is you work for a company for 12 years as a world-class security engineer. And then so you don't leave, or to reward you for all the hard work you did at the company, they give you the CISO title. I know a lot of people that are technical with the CISO title get upset with me, but that's not a CISO. You're a world-class security engineer. That's awesome. But the problem is you like technology, you speak technology, and you love technology, which means you're not going to be an effective chief information security officer. So the test I always give is this. If you're sitting at your desk and you get a text or a phone call that says one of your servers been breached, one of your servers has been compromised and data is being exfiltrated, what do? If your response is, I run into the data center, or if you're virtual, I log into the servers and I start analyzing, verifying, and validating what's going on, congratulations. You're a world-class security engineer and you're not going to make an effective CISO. On the other hand, if you answered that question, Eric, I would immediately gather my team. I would go in and start tasking them to perform certain activity. I would have them give me a status update in 45 minutes. I would then immediately translate that to business impact, and I would jump on a call with the executives and give them a high-level overview of what's happening in the strategy we're implementing and give them an update in 60 minutes. Then you're a world-class chief information security officer. So it's really not right or wrong, but doing what you love. And if you love the technology, don't be a CISO. And if you love the strategy and the translation, then that's a more effective role. But from an executive standpoint, are you getting cybersecurity communicated to you in a way that you understand and can take action? Or is it a 40-page slide deck on technology that you roll your eyes and you're just checking your phone during the entire briefing?
Got it. And I guess that's what you're saying, which is if you don't have that communication element from the CISO, then how is your organization meant to take this seriously, understand, digest, get stronger? This is about communication and leadership from the security team, right?
Exactly. And in my career and in my life, I've learned that all problems and all issues in any area of your life are always caused and solved by communication. So if you're making bad decisions or you're not doing things correctly, then you need to increase the communication or get better communication. And to me, with executives, where you have companies where the executives think they're secure, yet they get broken into because they have a server that's been unpatched for 12 months that contain critical data. That's a communication issue, because I don't know about you, but I'm not going to believe that the executives of one of the largest oil pipelines in the world sat in their boardroom and said, hey, we have our critical systems that control the pipeline accessible directly from the internet with known vulnerabilities that haven't been fixed in 2 years. This is a good idea. Let's do it. Right. I cannot imagine that any reasonable executive would ever consciously make that decision. So the fact that that has happened leads to the conclusion that they just weren't aware, or it wasn't communicated in the proper language for them to take appropriate action.
Do you think that because insecurity, so much of what we deal with, and this risk is sometimes so intangible? We're talking about hypotheticals, we're talking about scenarios that might happen, risks that may exist, breaches that might occur. Is this why communication is so key? Because actually we have to present this in a compelling way sometimes, where we don't have data points, we don't have a business case other than, this is a risk, it could potentially happen, and it could potentially cause this damage. Is that why communication is so important, or is it something else?
No, you're spot on. We're dealing with risk, the probability of loss. We don't know what's going to happen, and we need to communicate in that language. The problem is, if you're a world-class security engineer, you're going to go back to what you're comfortable with, which is the technology piece, not the risk business piece. The second issue is cybersecurity people are brilliant, which means they form conclusions and believe it's correct. So when they go in and talk to executives, they are arguing their point. We must do this, we must do that. They make it very, very emotional and only present one side. So my whole thing when I train up CISOs and security folks is let data drive decisions, not emotions. And I'll make it real simple for you. If you want to get the budget, if you want to be secure, if you want the executives to understand cybersecurity, all you should present to them are four things. This is what could happen. This is the likelihood that it will happen. This is the cost if it happens. And this is the cost to fix it. So, example, all of our data can be taken hostage and we would not be able to access it. There's an 80% chance that will occur. If it occurs, it will cost us $7 million, and I want $300K to fix it. Would you like me to fix this? And once again, I don't care what you say. If you want to accept a $7 million risk that has an 80% chance of occurring, okay, I made you aware of it. If you'd rather reduce it by spending $300K, I'm fine with that. But now what I'm doing is I'm giving them the data. Notice I didn't say ransomware. I didn't say firewalls. I didn't say filtering. I didn't say anything technical. I kept it at a business discussion focused on revenue and gave them both options.
I was talking to a cyber insurer recently, and they were talking about how difficult it is to price risk. And my thought when you say this is that if the insurers are having a tough time of sort of pricing risk accurately within cyber, what advice do you have for companies that are thinking, this 4-step program sounds exactly like what we need, but I don't always know how to price this risk. And certainly if we've never, let's say like we've never suffered loss from like a phishing attack before or a BEC attack before, and we don't think, we can't go to a publicly available report to just sort of pull a number off the shelf. What guidance do you have for teams in terms of estimating, in the most accurate way, what is the cost of this risk?
And that's a brilliant question, because what it comes down to is don't try to get it exact. Just come up with a rounding error. So when I do this exercise with companies, I say, okay, I'm going to give you a multiple choice test. Based on how your company is set up right now, the fact that you don't have email filtering, the fact that you allow attachments from unknown entities, and the fact that you have unpatched servers. A, do you believe it's 0 to 25% chance that you're going to get hit with ransomware? B, it's 26 to 50%. C, it's 51 to 75, or D, it's 76 to 100. And almost everyone in the room picks D. So I say, great. I don't care if it's 77, if it's 83, if it's 90. Be conservative, go with 76. But the point is, don't try to sit there and debate whether it's 75, 85, or 95. Who cares? And then I
Mhm.
do the same thing. I say, if you're going to get hit with ransomware, multiple choice. Is it going to cost your company 70,000? Choice A. Is it going to be 700,000? Choice B. Is it going to be 7 million? Choice C. Or is it going to be 70 million? Choice D. And if everyone in the room says, okay, the best answer is C, great. I don't care if it's 4 million, 7 million, or 9 million, right? It's close enough. So I think the trick is we need to go in and get general bans. The problem is executives don't like the qualitative. Like if you go in and saying, this is a high risk that could cost us a lot of money and things will be really bad, which is really the truth, they don't like that. So we have to take that and put it into a banding of quantitative, because something that has an 80% chance of occurring and costs 7 million is something that's actionable. Something that's really bad that could cost a lot of money isn't. So we have to recognize that it's not a perfect science, but we need to start bridging that gap. And the reason why insurance companies are struggling right now is because in a lot of these cases, it's 100%. So
Mm.
if you look at you're insuring somebody and it is a guarantee over the next 6 months that they're going to get into a car accident, you're not going to insure them because it's way too high a risk. So right now, if you're looking at ransomware and extortion, it's pretty close to 100% that most companies are going to get hit in the next 6 months. So the real answer for insurance companies is we shouldn't insure them, but they want to play in that game. And that's the internal struggle that these insurance companies have, is they want to make money and be in cyber insurance, but they really know that it's a losing battle.
Yeah, and that's exactly what this person said. They said the problem is not sort of getting new business; it's selecting which business that we should take. So I agree with you on that. I love this point about the misconception of the CISO not being a technologist, but actually having to be a great leader and communicator. What other misconceptions do you think exist today about cybersecurity?
I think the biggest one, believe it or not, is still that it's not going to happen to us. I run across small, medium, and even large companies that are like, Eric, we're not going to get hit with a cyber attack. It happens to other people. It's like we view accidents, illnesses, and robberies. Those happen to other people, not to us. So I think people still don't truly recognize that you are going to be a victim of cyber attack. It's a guarantee, and accepting it. And then the second thing is that cybersecurity is their responsibility. So I think that's the first thing that we need to embrace, that it's going to happen, and accept responsibility at the executive level. And then the other issue is that it's easier to blame others than accept responsibility.
Right.
So
Yeah.
like when we looked at SolarWinds, or we looked at Colonial, we look at any of these other big attacks that are out there, the correct thing would have been is for them to step up and said, listen, we made a mistake. We didn't do the basics. We didn't patch. We didn't have proper passwords. But instead of that, they'd rather go, oh, it's this big adversary. There's nothing we could have done about it, and sort of point the finger at others instead of accepting responsibility. So I think that's, we just have to, I don't like it, but we just have to recognize that cybersecurity needs to be a regulated industry. Because just like with Enron, right, where publicly traded companies couldn't self-regulate and they had to go in and pass regulation, I think these big techs has proven they can't properly implement security. So we need to put regulation in place to hold them accountable.
What is a regulated? Oh, maybe let me rephrase the question. What does cybersecurity regulation look like for a company in your mind?
To me, what it looks like is similar to what we said, which is first is any systems accessible from the internet, you must patch within 15 days. Now,
Mm.
will people kick and scream, and will people tough? I mean, we got to raise the bar. We got to start protecting individuals. And if you want to make it 20 days, that's fine. And any data that is sensitive or could have impact needs to be encrypted with keys, stored on separate servers. To me, we got to get prescriptive. I know with regulation, they want to be broad and they want to be high level and they want to leave it discretionary. But to me, this is not a hard problem. If you go back and study all of the attacks over the last 5 years, there's very clear patterns of why these attackers are getting in and where the vulnerabilities are. And it's real simple. Companies are not updating their operating system. They're not patching their system. They're not protecting their data, and they're not implementing effective encryption. So if we just start to fix some of those basic core components, we can start to make some significant progress.
Yeah, and we regulate we regulate many areas of industries, otherwise. And like if we're building an airplane or we're building a building, there's regulation involved for the safety of the people who have to use that. And data, it is a very, very strong argument to say that data should be the same.
Exactly.
You just released your new book, Cyber Crisis: Protecting Your Business from Real Threats in the Virtual World. Could you tell us a little bit more about this? And what are the biggest real threats companies face in the virtual world today?
Sure. So throughout my career, I'm always big on trying to solve problems. So when I wrote my first book 20 years ago, I felt the biggest problem was there weren't enough people with technical knowledge. That's why my books, Hackers Beware, Network Security Bible, were very technical focused. Then 3 years ago, I said, no. We got enough really smart technical people. The problem is the non-technical folks, parents, teachers, doctors, lawyers, they don't understand cybersecurity. So that's when I wrote Online Danger. And then about 1.5 years ago, I said, no. The real problem is that businesses, executives don't understand cyber. There's not a book written in clear, easy to understand language that an executive can pick up, read in under 2 hours, and understand the big threats and issues that were out there. So that was the driver behind this book. Cyber Crisis is a business book. It's not technical. I actually had over 15 CEOs, COOs, CFOs, and chief legal counsel review each chapter to make sure that it was really written in an easy to understand format. And then also last January, when I started writing it, I predicted by mid 2021 that these attacks were going to get very severe and we were going to be in the midst of a cyber crisis. So that's really the key premise of this book is cybersecurity is a real threat, and there's easy, actionable things you can take to protect and secure your organization. And sort of funny story is the book came out June 1st. So early May, I'm starting to talk to some of my friends going, I wonder if I got the timing wrong because things are pretty quiet on the cyber front. And I predicted we were going to be in the midst of a cyber crisis. So I jokingly say it would be nice if activity kicked up a little bit right this month. And then we know what happened mid-May with Colonial and all the different attacks and ransomware and everything else. And the funny thing is after the Colonial attack was announced on Friday night, on Saturday morning, I wake up and there's like 30 texts from my friends going, Eric, did you hack Colonial in order to sell your book? I'm like, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Right. But I tell you, sometimes you got to pat yourself on the back when you get the timing almost perfect for what was happening with attacks and when my book was released. So all I can say is a virtual thank you to the Russians for going along with my master plan.
So why did you make that prediction a year ago about this cyber crisis that we would be in today?
Once again, awesome question. So a couple of factors. One is, and remember, this was January 2020. I believed in 2020 there was going to be a disruptive event. Now, I thought it was going to be something with the cloud or other factors. Once again, I don't think anybody could have predicted COVID, but I sort of knew that there was going to be a disruptive event where a lot of people were going to have to work remotely, will work from home, and there was going to be a huge migration to the cloud. So anytime you have major changes in technology, it's going to naturally create vulnerabilities and exposure. So that was sort of data point one. Data point two, I started noticing in 2019 that companies were getting sloppy. We were seeing critical infrastructure, oil and gas, chemical processing where those systems were always built with air gaps and were separate and isolated from the internet, we started seeing, for convenience, functionality, and other reasons, those systems start to be interconnected to the internet, and that happening. And then also just tracking what was going on, Russia, China, Venezuela, where I was seeing these commercialization of these entities, and ransomware attacks were happening a lot in January 2020. They were just focused on small to medium companies demanding 20,000 in ransom. So nobody made it to the news, but I saw that. So to me, seeing the increase of this criminal activity, seeing it work, seeing the vulnerability, seeing people get sloppy, seeing this major shift to cloud, to me, it was sort of the perfect storm that sometime mid, and once again, it could have been second, third, or fourth quarter, but sometime mid 2022, about 18 months out from January 2020, this was all going to come together as the perfect storm, and we were going to have this massive cyber crisis that we're currently witnessing today.
You mentioned the pandemic and the move to remote and hybrid work. Has that shift basically that has accelerated this cloud transformation, and that is the key risk here, or does it also bring other risks with it? You know, in your mind, what is a hybrid work environment or a remote work environment? What do people in those companies need to think about from a security perspective that maybe they didn't need to think about before when people were in an office?
So a couple things with that. So the first one is one of my favorite questions that I love asking. So I'm starting to travel again. And about 6 weeks ago, I went up to New York and was visiting one of my friends who's a CISO for a large financial institution. And I asked him, I said, hey, in 2020, how many new offices did you open? And he looked at me, he's like, Eric, didn't you follow the news? We closed down 80% of our offices. We didn't open up any new offices. We actually shut down most of them. I said, interesting. I said, okay, how many people are now working from home that previously weren't working from home? And he went and looked up the numbers and he said, about 7,000. I said, do you realize you opened up 7,000 remote offices in 2020? And it was sort of this awkward pause where it's like, wait for it, wait. And he's like, oh, I never thought about that, right? We didn't realize that essentially we went in and very quick, very fast, we created all of these remote offices. Now, remember, these remote offices do not have infrastructure. They don't have firewalls. They don't have monitoring. They don't have SIM. They don't have any of that. In most cases, the wireless or network was probably set up by your 15-year-old kid whose primary focus was either to play video games or do TikTok videos, right? And not security. You're using outdated computers that haven't been patched and there's no technical support staff. So the first big thing of the pandemic is it basically took most of our security out of play. Most companies in March of 2020, the primary security was in offices network architecture. So when you come into an office and you plug into the network, you were behind a large array of filtering, security, and other components to protect and secure email, web surfing, and other activity. Then literally overnight, you then move to this remote office where all of that security went away. So that's sort of problem one. Problem two is you lost control of your data because now everybody at home has a 4 terabyte hard drive that's 90% full, and all of your data is out of control. And then moving everything to the cloud very quickly, you basically lost that entire authentication layer. So it's sort of the control of the data, the loss of the architecture, the data to the cloud, and then no validation, authentication, or tracking. And so to put all that together allowed the epidemic to basically take everything we've done with security over the last 10 years and pretty much move us back to the ice age where minimal security, minimal controls, and it was all about survivability and functionality.
You say ice age, I was going to say Wild West, but I think it's a similar concept, right? It's just we've regressed, and organizations are essentially placing there's a different level of control. There's a different level of rigor, I guess, in every one of those remote employee offices around the world now. What's your advice and what's your current thinking in terms of how we move forward from this? And this question kind of is twofold, really. The cyber crisis we're in right now, this ransomware epidemic that we're seeing on these attacks on organizations, that's like part one. How do we move forward from here? What are the ways that we start countering these attacks and getting ahead of them as organizations? And the second thing is, what's your advice to organizations who are now moving to a permanent hybrid work environment?
Yeah, so the biggest concern I have right now, and I guess I'll continue. I did Ice Age, now I'll do an iceberg, is what we're seeing, even though it looks really bad, is only a tip of the iceberg. I mean, if you really look at the fundamental problem that's happening now, it's a lot worse. And the reason is this: most companies are compromised for over 31 months before they detect it. So once again, they're not giving us the information, but I will almost guarantee, and so far with Colonial, I called everything correctly. I was the first person to basically say that Colonial paid the ransom. And I had major news channels disagree with me and say you're totally wrong. And then, of course, 72 hours later, right, it proved that they absolutely did pay the ransom. So I can almost guarantee that Colonial, when they go back and they're not going to publicly release this, they've been compromised for probably over 2 years. The attackers were in their critical infrastructure and were just waiting for the perfect opportunity. Because I'll tell you right now, that ransomware attack, the way it was orchestrated, and they were able to take down an entire pipeline, you don't do that in a month. You don't do that in 2 months. That takes multiple years. So I think the bigger concern is there's a lot of companies out there that are compromised right now and do not realize it. And they're not going to realize it for another 9 to 12 to 24 months. So that's the first problem, is we have a bigger issue. We just haven't seen the symptoms of what's happening and what's occurring. So that's what really bothers me the most. The next one is with organizations that are moving to the cloud. To me, it's fairly straightforward. It's a 3-tier architecture. What we're looking at now is, to sort of get security correctly, is all your data's in the cloud, which honestly I like, because now it's in one spot, it's controlled, and it's managed. Here's the thing you have to remember. With operating systems, cloud security, or any outsourced security that we have, security is there, but you need to turn it on and configure it. So I think the first thing, my first advice to companies is, that's great, you're in the cloud, the data is controlled and managed in a single spot, and a third party is taking care of that, but you need to go in and engage. Make sure you have security, make sure you have hardening, make sure you have patching, make sure you have all those measures in place. The second tier, which most companies don't have and they need to set up, is an authentication tier. So it basically wraps around the cloud. The only way to get to the cloud is to go through this authentication tier. And this authenticates individuals, 2-factor authentication, geolocation, looking for anomalies, behavioral analytics, looking for unusual activity. If you're always logging in at 9 in the morning and accessing 5 records, and now you log in at 2 a.m. from a foreign country and access 50,000 records, that's probably problematic. We probably want to minimize or reduce it, because there is a lot of good authentication and there's a lot of good detection technologies out there. We're just not using it. We're just not using it there. So we need to have that middle tier. And then, to me, the biggest piece that makes all this magic happen is the endpoint needs to be a thin client. We have fast enough bandwidth. We need to get out of this concept where you have an operating system for 3 years that never changes and you have a 4 terabyte hard drive. We need to give everyone a thin client where they basically get a new operating system every single day that's patched and up to date, and they have no data stored locally. Everything's in the cloud. So now you have a thin client, and when they turn on their computer, there's no local data. They go through the authentication tier, verify and validate. They're then getting monitored, and they go to the cloud where they access the data. They leave the data there. They shut down their computer, and they get a brand new operating system tomorrow. To me, that 3-tier architecture is really sort of the future that has functionality and security properly integrated.
And you've teed me up perfectly for my next question, which is that that sounds like, in terms of that strategy from a technology perspective, there's a lot to like about that. But actually, people, you could argue, are the gatekeepers to the digital systems and data that every organization holds today. What role do employees have to play in this new world?
To me, and that's one that's different from a lot of security folks, to me, their main role is to protect their authentication credentials. That's really their only role. So they need to make sure that their token for two-factor, their PINs, their passwords, their information is protected. And then everything else, there's no local storage, there's no compromise or other factors there. So we're taking a lot out of their hands, because to me, that's the problem. The way a lot of companies have done security is, let's put so much on the user that's not feasible. Like, we have clients now going, well, Eric, if our users just didn't visit rogue websites, if they didn't click on inappropriate links, if they didn't open attachments that they weren't supposed to, if they verified everyone they were communicating with, and they probably checked every email, and they did out-of-band validation, out-of-band communication, and they probably verified this, and they caught then we'd be secure. And I'm like, really? And when do the unicorns show up, right? It's not feasible to put all that pressure on the end user. And let's face it, awareness is important and awareness is critical, but awareness is not going to make you secure. So what I did with the architectural design I put together is, we're basically taking a lot of that off the user and really just putting a minimal amount of responsibility on them. And then we're managing the security at a central level to verify and validate what's happening and what's occurring.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting point. Like, our role as security leaders is to take these obstacles out of the way. What gets challenging, though, is when you think about something like business email compromise, which, could be a fraudulent invoice sent through email, where your attacker is spoofing the identity of a trusted third party. There's no kind of loss of credentials, or there's no credential phishing taking place there. That's just pure social engineering. How does that kind of factor into your advice about trying to take responsibility away from people for security?
This goes back to what we talked about a little earlier, which is balancing risk and presenting both sides of the equation. So, for example, I was with a company and I was with their executives, about 20 of them, and they were getting hit with ransomware. They were getting hit a couple times a month. It was over $1 million of ransom payments that they were making. And I analyzed all of the data, and 97% of all the attacks were coming from unknown, untrusted emails that had attachments and embedded links. So I went in and I said, listen, we need to go in and block these emails. We need to go in and stop this, because I did the analysis and this will stop most of the attacks. You would have thought I was calling their baby ugly. You can't do this, right? This will break the organization. We need to allow it. Blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, guys, I have the data right here to show you that if you do this, the impact to the business will be minimal. And they wanted nothing to do with that. So we end the meeting and the CEO says, Eric, can you please stay? So I say, sure. He says, Eric, how much confidence do you have in that data? I said, I'm highly confident. He goes, okay, I'm giving you permission to go ahead and block those untrusted emails. Don't tell anybody, because I trust what you said. It looks like you did your analysis and we've worked with you before and you've always been right. So go ahead and block the email. So we go in and block all the untrusted emails, all the attachments, embedded links. Nobody says anything. Nobody notices. Nobody complains. 3 months later, we have the next meeting and everyone's like, man, we had no ransomware. Life was good. See, Eric, we didn't need to do your crazy idea. And the CEO looks at me and says, Eric, you can tell him. I said, after the meeting, I met with the CEO and we blocked all those emails, and 2 things happened. 1, the ransomware attacks pretty much went to 0. And 2, there was no impact on the business. And there was just sort of awkward silence in the room. But that's what companies need to be willing to do. They need to do the analysis, figure out how the attacks are getting in, and make a business decision. Are we willing to take a small hit to the business potentially in order to stop a significant amount of attacks that are costing us millions upon millions of dollars. To me, that's really the trick. We don't want to block or stop anything. And to me, this goes back to communication. The way most security people communicate is emotionally. We have to block email. We have to do this. It's bad. It's bad. It's bad. And everyone's like, okay, but if we do nothing, it's fine. To me, what we need to do is if you keep doing what you're doing, it will cost you $1 million. If we start blocking and stopping, it will save you $1 million. Which do you want to do? And we have to start making those hard decisions, but it all comes with proper communication and speaking the language of business so they understand both options available to them.
Eric, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. That was an awesome discussion. I wanted to wrap up by asking some quick fire questions. This is our way of getting to know the humans on the Human Layer Security podcast a little bit more. Could you tell me what's the best book you've ever read?
Oh, best book I ever read. There's a couple there, but I'm going to probably have to go with one of the classics, but it'll be Napoleon Hill. But I won't go with Think and Grow Rich. I'll go with Interview with the Devil by Napoleon Hill.
And what's the app that you just can't live without?
The app that I can't live without, believe it or not, is DoorDash. I'm working 24 hours. I'm traveling all over the world and I need my food. So I would definitely say I could live with anything but DoorDash.
I've got to ask now, follow-up question. What's your go-to order on DoorDash?
My go-to order on DoorDash, and once again, please don't judge me because they're awesome, but my go-to order is a pound of crab legs, a half a pound of buffalo shrimp mild, and a half a pound of garlic wings from either Wingstop or one of those local places.
That sounds good. And what's the best TV show you watched in lockdown?
I don't watch TV. I'm a big reader, but to be fair to you, it was on TV. So I would say The Secret. Once again, it wasn't a perfect movie or TV show, but I really did enjoy that. To me, it sort of taught you some good lessons of life and self-realization.
That's awesome. Eric, thank you so much. It's been great to have you with us today.
My pleasure, and thank you.
That's awesome. Eric.
And that just leaves me to say thank you very much for listening. We'll be back with more human layer security insights in our next episode. But if you can't wait that long, you can visit our blog at tessian.com/blog, where you'll find lots of amazing content, advice, and tips. And if you enjoyed our show, please rate and review it on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.